When we talk about the Jesuits, one of the first things that a lot of people get into a controversy over is the extreme Jesuit Oath. It was released originally kind of talked about in the mainstream back in an election that took place where there were two candidates for Congress in Pennsylvania, Eugene Bonniwell and Thomas Butler. And this was brought up and a lot of people thought it was just maybe a political attack and not necessarily accurate. And so, but nevertheless, it made its way into some congressional records, and you can find it also online in several places. But there's another controversial document, the Monita Secreta, which was the secret instructions of the Jesuits. And in it had some controversial stuff of how they would swindle money or how they would get people's influence and win their confidence and then go about their work. It was a very, very, very controversial work. The first copy was discovered in the Jesuits' College at Paderborn in Westphalia, and a second copy in the Prague in 1611. But they initially dismissed it as a forgery, but then later on there was a work that was discovered in the British Museum about 20 years before the alleged forgery. So as far as whether or not it's a forgery, frankly, I think it's probably accurate. And the main method that I go about demonstrating whether or not this is true or not is let's look at their fruits. Okay, so let's look at the surrounding evidence in the publications by the Jesuits. So that's part of what I get at in this research. The preface to this Jesuit oath, one of the things that it said was, "My son, heretofore you have been taught to act the dissembler among Roman Catholics to be a Roman Catholic, and to spy even among your own brethren. To believe no man, to trust no man, among the Reformers to be a Reformer, among the Huguenots to be a Huguenot, among the Calvinists to be a Calvinist, among the Protestants generally to be a Protestant. But they say to descend so low as to become a Jew among the Jews." Now, once again, one of the ways that I find that that's actually verifiable is that consistent with what they did. We'll take a look at this. This is Manuel de Lacunza. In the Counter-Reformation, he wrote a book called La Venida del Mesías in Gloria y Majestad. But he wrote under the pen name Juan Josaphat Ben Ezra. He wrote under a Jewish name. So here's direct evidence of them assuming to be a Jew among the Jews to go directly plant seeds of doubt in the Protestants and sow the seeds of ultimately futurism by placing all the events of Bible prophecy about the Antichrist and everything way in the future so that Protestants would get misled. And sadly, what happened was this book was brought to America through the work of Edward Irving and Darby, brought to the Dallas Theological Seminary, and now we have futurism being propagated, very widely so amongst Protestants today. So, it's evidence of the work. Now, let's talk about the persecutory aspects of this oath, because there's some very vile stuff within, and I'm not going to read all of that. Most of you guys are probably familiar with some of the stuff contained within the oath. But do we have verified oaths from Rome that mimicked some of that? Well, this is an example right here, the abbot's oath under Clement VIII. "I swear that heretics and schismatics and rebels to our Lord, the Lord Pope, or his successors, I will to the extent of my power persecute and beat down. Propose persecuar and impugnabo." And actually, we happen to find a copy of this on A Books from 1682. And this is pictures of the copy that we carry and take around in our ministry to show different churches and whatnot. Here's a very real oath. And it actually has the little red N where you insert your name as you're swearing this oath to persecute and beat down heretics. Now, it doesn't go as graphic as the Jesuit extreme oath, but it gives you evidence that this was consistent with what they did. Now, are they a secret society? Do they operate in that way? Well, let's take a look. The Catholic Register, April 16, 1914, said there is no crime that the doting warrior, General Miles, charges against us to which we must not plead guilty. He says that we are trying to make the United States a Catholic country. We most certainly are doing all in our power to accomplish it. I mean, we're seeing that today. Look at the Supreme Court. It's loaded with Catholics now.
Absolutely.
look at all the appointments now. One of the big things I was pointing out here recently is Hegseth, who got confirmed as, what did he get confirmed as? Hegseth got in as, was it Department of Defense, something like that? With the Pentagon, anyhow. On his arm, he's got this tattoo of Deus Vult, which comes directly from the speech given when the Crusades went forth in 1095. So, I mean, it's fascinating, some of the history that we're seeing take place today. But this was published in the Western Watchman, a Catholic journal devoted to the interests of the Catholic Church in the West. No one is more honest with Protestants than we are, for no one knows them better. But they go on, the church is persecuted, only a tyro in church history will deny it. The apologists, so they admit it. But they say, but will the Catholic Church give bonds that she will not persecute at all? Will she guarantee absolute freedom and equality of all churches and all faiths? The Catholic Church gives no bonds for her good behavior. She has made mistakes in her policy, which she promptly corrected as soon as discovered. She has countenanced violence when more humane measures would have been of more avail. Her children and her clergy have often been carried away by popular passion, but she gives no bonds that such things shall not occur again.
Wow. So this is a promise.
Yep.
Yeah. So not only they didn't deny doing it, they're pretty much saying if we have to do it again, we have never made any promise that this will never take place again. And I think one of the reasons for this is the claim of infallibility. I was reading that because of infallibility, even the persecution of the Catholic Church is justifiable.
Yeah. Yeah. And, they say right here, when the church needed armed men to enlist as crusaders, the young men of the church shouldered the musket and saber and obeyed the orders of the church. When the church wanted to get rid of the Saracens, the faithful arose en masse and extinguished them. The church may have to call on you to defend her rights in this country, and I know the young men will obey the church and take up arms to exterminate the enemies of the Roman Catholic Church.
Mercy.
And they said here, we call upon the clergy everywhere to organize the laity, male, female, old and young, into secret societies that the men and boys may have competent instructors to give them military training that they may be prepared to aid and sustain our faith in an emergency. And we've run into, I've run into some of these folks who are connected with some of these orders online, and they black out their faces. Actually, I've run into a few that black out their faces, like on some of the profile pics of like who they're connected with and whatnot. Like, there's some shady stuff going on. I'll just say that.
Very obvious. Yeah. Very obvious. Yeah.
But if we go back to how this order, its foundation, back in the 13th century, we see the establishment of the Inquisition. And when the Jesuits came along, they became, as the Great Controversy talks about, the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery, cut off from every earthly tie and human interest, dead to the claims of natural affection, reason and conscience wholly silenced. They knew no rule, no tie but that of their order, and no duty but to extend its power. So it was very much, they instilled a sense of fanaticism, and they vowed themselves to perpetual poverty and humility. Totally extreme for their order. And, the sad reality was they took over from the Dominicans the Inquisition and turned it into the mighty engine that it became. And one of the things I'll say briefly about the Inquisition, what we want to highlight here is the stark difference between the Society of Jesus and Jesus Christ. Eymerich's Inquisitor's Manual taught that a whole city must be burnt on account of the heretics who live in it. Whoever pleases may seize and kill any heretics. But Christ, when his disciples said, shall we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? He rebuked them and said, ye know not of what manner of spirit you are of. So the stark contrast here between what took place in the Inquisition and what Christ taught it's very, very clear. Now, this book goes on to say prelates or inquisitors may torture witnesses to obtain the truth. The establishment of torture, coercion, that was very much a principle with the Inquisition that the Jesuits became a part of. There's actually an allegorical statue in the church, the Chiesa il Gesù in Rome, that has Huss and Luther being destroyed here, and you can see that in their cathedral. But back at the very beginning, we've got Ignatius of Loyola. He was born Inigo Lopez at the Castle of Loyola. He was kind of a colorful character, brash and easily offended. But he was born to a wealthy family. There's actually a magnificent monastery dedicated to his memory. The police records of the day said that he was a bit of a brutish fellow, violent and vindictive. But he kind of got some fame in a battle with the French in Pamplona. There was a cannonball that ricocheted and hit his leg and kind of destroyed it, and destroyed his future as a warrior. But when he was recuperating, he read books about the saints and about Jesus, fanciful ones, and he kind of envisioned Christ as a great commander, and as a saint, he would capture the world for Jesus Christ. He made his way to the mountains of Montserrat. Here's an image of that. There's a monastery there today, and you can see the interior of it, just very much ornate with gold and jewels, fitting quite aptly the description in Revelation 17 of this mother church with all the gold and jewels. But he spent 3 days in confession and an entire night before this Black Madonna statue and committed himself to Mary. And, he thought he would go to Jerusalem and conquer it for Jesus Christ. Where the Crusades failed, he determined he would do so. Ultimately, though, because he couldn't go to Jerusalem, he couldn't actually go to Barcelona. There was a plague there, and he stayed at Manresa. And Manresa, he ended up spending 10 months in a cave, and in his exhaustion, had dreams and visions. And he claimed that the secret doctrine was taught to him in his eye. He saw lights flashing, and he believed he chased Satan like a dog with a whip. Now, it's an interesting background here, but in 1534, in a crypt beneath this church, now Montmartre, he and 6 others pronounced promises of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, this man was known for his occult powers. In the Bible, we have examples where I think of Philip, for example, who was teleported, right? Transported in the spirit from one location to another. The Jesuits were known for some similar type occult miracles. And, I think back here to Egypt, how the sorcerers in Moses' day were able to cast down their staffs and have them turn into snakes. But ultimately, we know which snake was genuine and which was not.
Correct.
But nevertheless, they had some of these supposed abilities, allegedly. And it reminds me of, there was a story told in the early church that apparently Simon Magus performed some sort of miracle like that. And whether or not it's true or not, I'll leave that to the listener to determine. But the story goes that Peter prayed, and the Simon Magus actually ultimately collapsed and fell and died on the spot.
Really?
So whether or not that's true or not, it's from the apocryphal Acts of Peter that gives kind of an elaborate tale of what happened there. But these kinds of acts were not necessarily something new, but the devil has worked signs and wonders throughout history. Ultimately, Pope Paul III confirmed the order, and in a bull, Regimini Militatis Ecclesiae, to the government of the church militant. So it's very much like a military order.
Correct.
Yeah. This is a book right here that I recommend reading if you want to learn more about them. It's available online. It's from 1667. Wow. It's the Ignatian Fireworks, or the Fiery Jesuits. And it demonstrates a lot of what they taught. But the Jesuit powers given to Loyola and his followers included even to excommunication. Now, excommunication was a big deal, because if you were excommunicated, it was almost like a hit was put out on you, because anybody could kill an excommunicated person legally according to the church. And so to actually have that kind of power, it was almost like the ability to sentence somebody to death. Now, in the early days, they first proved themselves in the hospitals having kind of a medical, almost like a medical missionary work, right?
Yeah, similar.
A
Yeah,
counterfeit one.
that's right. They weren't
But
about doing good service. Yeah.
yeah. It almost reminds me of a certain Dr. Fauci,
Yeah.
but I won't go there.
Yeah. That's a mouthful.
So yeah. Anyhow, but it was very fanatical. They did menial services, but there were times where they would practice putting mind over matter, if you will. Some of these include some rather graphic accounts of where they would scrape out an abscess and put it in their mouth, or they would
Oh boy.
lay down in a bed full of pediculosis or vermin just to kind of force their body to follow the mind in a very fanatical fashion. But it's very sad, but ultimately when they went forward, they were rather successful in establishing schools all over in India, Japan. At first, only 60 of them were allowed, but the door later opened to more of them. And this is an example of one of them right here, Matteo Ricci, who infiltrated the court, read the language, very much became teachers of the people and educated people. It kind of makes you wonder today what's going on with the educational system in the world. How are these guys operating today? I would estimate that it's probably very similar in what they're doing with the school systems.